A family of 4 went on a road trip and mysteriously vanished, but 15 years later, their car wreckage was discovered in the mountains. Before we continue, don't forget to subscribe to the channel, like the video, and comment where in the world you're watching from. Let's go. Robert Mason stood in his kitchen on the morning of June 12, 2005, meticulously checking items off a camping list spread across the counter. Sunlight streamed through the windows of their Maple Street home, catching the steam rising from his coffee mug. At 42, Robert maintained the practical demeanor that had earned him respect at the urban development firm where he worked as a civil engineer. Even on a Sunday morning, he wore one of his trademark plaid shirts, the forest green one Jennifer had given him last Christmas. Flashlights, first aid kit, extra batteries, he muttered, ticking each item off with satisfaction. He glanced at the wall clock, 7:15, perfect timing. Upstairs, Jennifer Mason knelt beside their 8-year-old son's bed, helping Noah decide which clothes to pack for their 3-day excursion into Rocky Mountain National Park. At 39, her practiced hands, the same ones that tended to patients at Fort Collins Community Hospital, folded each item with hospital corner precision. "Can Rex come too?" Noah asked, clutching his well-worn dinosaur plush to his chest. His dark eyes, still carrying traces of his Guatemalan heritage, widened with concern. Jennifer smiled, tucking a strand of hair behind her ear. "Of course Rex can come. He's an explorer too, isn't he?" She touched the worn fabric of the toy dinosaur they had given Noah shortly after adopting him 6 years ago. "But you'll need to keep an eye on him. The mountains are big places for little dinosaurs." Outside in the backyard, 15-year-old Emily adjusted her camera settings, trying to capture a hummingbird hovering near the feeder. Her elaborate braided hairstyle, which had taken her nearly 30 minutes to perfect, swung slightly as she shifted position. The bird darted away just as she pressed the shutter button. "Come on," she whispered in frustration, lowering her semi-professional camera. The regional photography competition was only 2 months away, and she needed more wildlife shots for her portfolio. Her violin teacher had suggested that nature photography, like music, required patience and timing. Emily's thoughts drifted briefly to Wednesday's recital. She'd been practicing Mozart's Violin Concerto No. 3 for months. In the driveway, Robert knelt beside their blue metallic Honda Civic, meticulously checking the tire pressure. 15 years of engineering work had instilled in him a reverence for preventative maintenance. Jennifer emerged from the house carrying neatly packed backpacks, which she arranged with surgical precision in the trunk. "I packed extra bandages and antibiotic ointment," she said, her navy blue jacket, a constant companion during Colorado's mountain mornings, zipped halfway against the morning chill. "And I doubled Noah's allergy medication, just in case." Robert nodded appreciatively. "This is going to be the perfect family adventure," he said, standing up and dusting off his jeans. "The route Mark told me about should take us away from the tourist crowds." At 10:15, Margaret Sullivan, their 67-year-old neighbor, crossed the meticulously manicured lawn that was Robert's weekend pride. She carried a small container of homemade blueberry muffins, her usual parting gift whenever the Masons left town. "Jennifer, dear," Margaret called out, her silver hair catching the morning light. "I brought something for your trip." Jennifer accepted the container with a warm smile. "You're too kind, Margaret. We'll enjoy these tomorrow morning with our coffee." She lowered her voice conspiratorially. "Robert's taking us on a scenic route his colleague mentioned. Apparently, there's a trail that most tourists don't know about." Margaret's eyes brightened with interest. "How exciting! When will you be back?" "Wednesday afternoon," Jennifer replied, glancing toward the house where Emily was helping Noah adjust his red t-shirt. His favorite color dominated his wardrobe. "We'll be home in time for Emily's violin recital. She would be heartbroken to miss it." At 10:30, the Mason family piled into their Honda Civic. Noah pressed Rex against the rear window, waving enthusiastically at Margaret as Robert backed out of the driveway. Emily sat beside her brother, headphones draped around her neck, her violin case safely stowed in the trunk atop their sleeping bags. "Everyone ready for an adventure?" Robert called out, adjusting the rear-view mirror. Jennifer placed her hand on his knee and smiled. "Let's make some memories." 45 minutes later, security cameras at the gas station near the entrance to Rocky Mountain National Park captured the Mason family's last known movements. Robert pumped gas while Jennifer cleaned the windshield. Inside the store, Noah excitedly showed Rex to the attendant while Robert purchased a box of sodas, granola bars, and additional maps of the region. The timestamp on the footage read 11:47 ante meridiem. 2 days later, Catherine Mason sat in her living room, the evening news playing softly in the background as she held her phone to her ear. Her son's voicemail greeted her for the 4th time that day. At 65, Catherine maintained the pragmatic outlook that she had passed to Robert. But as the call went to voicemail again, an unusual sense of unease settled in her stomach. "They're probably in an area with poor reception," she murmured to herself, setting the phone down. "I'll try again tomorrow." The following day, Emily's music teacher called Jennifer's cell phone, concern growing when her most dedicated student failed to appear for her important recital. That same evening, Catherine's phone rang, Robert's supervisor explaining that her son had missed a crucial project meeting, something unprecedented in his 15 years with the company. On Thursday morning, Catherine used her spare key to enter her son's house. The silence that greeted her felt wrong. Walking from room to room, she noted the precise order of everything: plants watered, bed made, refrigerator cleared of perishables, all signs of a family planning to return. When she reached Emily's bedroom, Catherine froze. There, carefully positioned on the neatly made bed, lay Emily's violin case. Her trembling fingers dialed the Larimer County Sheriff's Department at precisely 10:15 in the morning. While Officer Derek Haywood began taking notes on the missing family report, his colleague burst into the room with disturbing news. The Masons' Honda Civic had been logged entering Rocky Mountain National Park on Monday morning, but there was no record of it ever leaving, and a severe storm had just hit the exact region where the family would have been hiking. Sheriff Paul Donovan spread detailed maps of Rocky Mountain National Park across his desk, the morning light illuminating the vast wilderness where the Mason family had vanished. At 54, Donovan's weathered face reflected 20 years of law enforcement experience in Larimer County, but missing families still weighed heavily on him. "They entered through the main gate Monday morning," he said, tracing a route with his finger. "No record of exit, which narrows our primary search area to these regions." He circled several hiking trails with a red marker, dividing the map into quadrants. Deputy Miles nodded, studying the topography. The storm that hit Tuesday night would have made navigation nearly impossible for an average family, especially if they went off the marked trails. "The Masons aren't average hikers," Donovan replied, recalling Catherine Mason's detailed description of her son's outdoors experience. "Robert Mason takes his family camping twice a year, but even experienced hikers can get disoriented when weather turns." By 9:15, the visitor center parking lot bustled with activity. Park rangers in olive uniforms gathered alongside police officers and volunteer search and rescue teams. Donovan handed out laminated photographs of the Masons, Robert's confident smile beneath his neatly trimmed beard, Jennifer's kind eyes, Emily's artistic poise, and Noah's infectious grin, dinosaur toy clutched against his red t-shirt. "We're working against time and terrain," Donovan told the assembled group. 4 people don't just vanish without a trace unless something went very wrong. Let's find them." In her son's living room, Catherine Mason sat rigidly on the edge of the sofa, phone clutched in her hand. Each ring sent her heart racing, each disappointed sigh when the caller wasn't the sheriff deepened the lines on her face. The grandfather clock in the corner, a wedding gift she and her late husband had given Robert and Jennifer, ticked relentlessly, marking each passing hour without news. "They must be simply stranded," she whispered to herself, straightening a family photo on the coffee table. "Robert knows how to keep them safe." The search teams fanned out across the most popular trails, their calls of Robert, Jennifer, Emily, Noah, echoing through pine forests and across alpine meadows. Specialized dogs sniffed backpacks containing items with the family's scent, while handlers scanned the undergrowth for signs of disturbance. Senior Park Ranger Ethan Wilson paused at a trail junction, consulting his GPS unit. 23 years of service had taught him the park's official trails intimately, but as he studied the digital map, the vastness of the unmarked terrain became oppressively apparent. There are hundreds of square miles where they could be if they went off trail, he told his junior partner, and if this colleague suggested a locals-only route. His voice trailed off as he gazed at the distant peaks. By Sunday, June 19th, the case had captured regional attention. A television van from KMGH Denver parked at the command post, where Sheriff Donovan gave his fourth press update in 3 days. "We've covered most major hiking trails and common camping areas," he reported, the fatigue evident in his voice despite his professional demeanor. "We're expanding our search to include less traveled areas and are following every potential lead." Behind him, search teams returned from another unsuccessful day, their expressions revealing what words wouldn't say. At Denver Urban Development, Robert's colleagues gathered in the conference room Monday morning, pinning maps to corkboards and organizing their own volunteer search parties. "Robert helped me when my car broke down in that snowstorm last winter," said Thomas Chen, an architect who had worked with Mason for 7 years. "He wouldn't leave anyone behind. We're not leaving him behind either." They printed 500 flyers featuring the Mason family's photograph, planning to distribute them throughout neighboring communities. On Tuesday, June 21st, Detective Williams interviewed Rick Simmons, a young gas station attendant at the Mountain View station, 40 minutes from the park entrance. "Yeah, I remember them clearly," Rick said, leaning against the counter. "The little boy accidentally knocked over a bottle of Mountain Dew, and his dad, guy in a plaid shirt, was super cool about it, cleaned everything up himself." Williams leaned forward. "Did they mention where they were heading?" Rick nodded, his expression brightening with recollection. The dad asked about alternative routes into the backcountry, said something about wanting to show his family views that regular tourists don't get to see. "I mentioned that the old logging road sometimes has wildlife sightings," Detective Williams wrote quickly, underlining the phrase, "views regular tourists don't see," before radioing this information to headquarters. At the Tactical Operations Center, previously tracked areas glowed red on digital maps, each unsuccessful search narrowing possibilities, while simultaneously highlighting the vastness of terrain yet to be explored. Satellite phones crackled with reports from teams checking secluded camping spots and lesser-known viewpoints. Catherine wandered into Emily's bedroom that evening, gently touching the ribbons and photography awards hanging from a corkboard. Her fingers traced a silver medal from last year's state junior photography competition. "Please bring them home," she whispered, the prayer falling into the silence of the empty house. On the 10th day of searching, June 22nd, a meteorologist from the National Weather Service entered the command post with grave news. "There's a severe system moving in faster than predicted," he explained, pointing to radar images on his tablet. "We're looking at potential flash flooding in the valleys and high winds at elevation." Donovan's face tightened as he studied the forecast. "How long do we have?" 3 hours, maybe 4, before it becomes dangerous." Orders crackled over radios as search teams reluctantly began collecting equipment and heading back to base. From her position on the mountain, Ranger Sarah Blackwell watched dark clouds gathering over distant peaks, her hand instinctively tightening around her radio as she called her team back. Through the windows of her son's home, Catherine watched sheets of rain begin to fall, her hands pressed against the glass. Lightning illuminated the mountains in the distance, each flash a reminder of the peril her family might be facing. Under a hastily erected tent at the park entrance, Sheriff Donovan faced reporters, water dripping from his hat brim. "Search operations are temporarily suspended due to extreme weather conditions," he announced, each word clearly costing him. "We'll resume as soon as it's safe for our teams to return to the field." On the 20th night, after the disappearance, while the community held a candlelight vigil for the Mason family, Sheriff Donovan's phone rang. On the line was Jackson Weber, an off-duty park ranger who had been fishing on his day off. "Sheriff, I just remembered something that might be important," Weber said, his voice tense with urgency. "That Sunday, I saw a blue Honda Civic heading toward the old Hunter's Access Road in the western quadrant, an unofficial route we don't even mark on tourist maps. It struck me as odd because that area is rarely visited by families, and none of our search teams have looked there yet." Sheriff Donovan called an emergency meeting at midnight, the ranger's revelation about the Hunter's Access Road sending a jolt of urgency through the exhausted search teams. Faded topographical maps, yellowed with age, were retrieved from storage and spread across a table in the emergency operations room. "This route doesn't even appear on current maps," Donovan said, tracing a faint dotted line that snaked through a particularly remote western sector of the park. "It's an old logging path that was decommissioned 20 years ago. Locals know it primarily for unauthorized hunting access." Deputy Ramirez studied the worn map. "If the Masons took this route based on a colleague's suggestion, they would have been completely off our search grid." The implications hung heavily in the air. They had been looking in the wrong places all along. By dawn, a small convoy of four-wheel-drive vehicles navigated the overgrown path, deep mud from recent rains making progress painfully slow. Detective Kyle Winters stepped carefully from his vehicle, camera in hand, meticulously photographing tire impressions partially preserved in dried sections of the muddy road. "These could match the Civic's tire pattern," he said, placing a measuring tape beside one particularly clear impression. "But there's been too much rain and wildlife traffic to be certain." Still, it was the first potential physical evidence they'd found in over 3 weeks of searching. At the sheriff's office, financial realities began to intrude on humanitarian efforts. By July 13th, 1 month after the disappearance, the search for the Mason family had cost Larimer County over $180,000. Donovan reviewed the expenditure reports with a growing sense of dread, knowing what would come next. Later that afternoon, he faced the county commissioners in the municipal building's meeting room. "I understand budget concerns," he said, standing firm before their skeptical expressions. "But we're talking about 4 missing people, including 2 children." Commissioner Hartwick leaned forward. "Sheriff, no one's suggesting we abandon the search entirely. But can you justify continuing, at current staffing levels, when we've found no concrete evidence in 4 weeks?" From the back row, Catherine Mason watched the proceedings, her red-rimmed eyes tracking every speaker. The past month had hollowed her once robust frame, leaving her clothes hanging loosely on her diminished form. The following day, under clear blue skies that seemed mockingly beautiful, Sheriff Donovan faced the assembled press outside department headquarters. "Effective immediately, we are scaling back active search operations for the Mason family," he announced, his professional tone belying the difficulty of the decision. "We'll maintain a dedicated investigative team and continue following leads, but the full-scale field operation cannot be sustained indefinitely." Catherine pushed through reporters, tears streaming down her weathered face. "They're out there somewhere in those mountains," she cried, her voice breaking. "My son knew the outdoors. He would have protected his family. Please don't give up on them yet." The television cameras captured her plea, broadcasting it across Colorado that evening. By October, the vibrant autumn colors that normally brought tourists flocking to the Rockies only deepened Catherine's sense of loss. She had permanently moved into Robert and Jennifer's home, keeping it exactly as they left it, a shrine to the family frozen in time. On a particularly chilly evening, Catherine's relationship with her younger son reached a breaking point. David Mason, who had flown in from Portland, spread legal documents across the kitchen table. "Mom, you need to start processing your grief," he said, gentleness failing to mask his frustration. "You're living in Robert's house, depleting your retirement savings to maintain 2 properties, and refusing to even discuss the possibility that they're not coming back." Catherine's hands trembled as she pointed toward the door. "Get out," she shouted, her voice unexpectedly powerful in her frail body. "You're abandoning your brother when he needs you most." David left that night, creating a rift that would remain unhealed for years. In his small office at the sheriff's department, Detective Winters, now the only investigator still dedicating significant time to the Mason case, discovered troubling inconsistencies. Bank records showed a $3,000 withdrawal from the Masons' joint account the day before their trip, an unusual amount for a simple 3-day excursion. Digging deeper, he recovered search history from Robert's laptop, showing extensive research on remote areas of the park and discussions in extreme hiking forums in the weeks before the disappearance. These findings painted a different picture than the casual family outing initially described. Jennifer requested an entire week off from the hospital, her supervisor confirmed when Winters followed up. Not just 3 days, as she told her neighbor. I found that strange at the time, but didn't think much of it. By January of the new year, with snow blanketing the search area and effectively halting any field operations until spring, another disturbing piece of information emerged. Noah's school principal contacted the detective about drawings the boy had made in the weeks before vanishing. Our school psychologist was reviewing files and noticed these, the principal explained, spreading childish artwork across his desk. The crayon drawings showed dark, menacing shapes pursuing small stick figures. Noah was drawing the same scene repeatedly, figures running from something large and shadowy. The child psychologist examined the drawings carefully. Children often process anxiety through art, but these show a specific fear pattern. Did Noah mention anyone following or watching the family? That night, in his office lit only by a desk lamp, Winters stared at 2 competing theories written on his whiteboard. Tragic accident versus planned disappearance. The evidence no longer pointed clearly in either direction. When the case seemed to have gone completely cold, Marcus Headley, Robert's former colleague, finally came forward with crucial information he had withheld for months. Rob didn't just mention a trail only locals know, Headley admitted nervously in Winters' office. The information came from a retired ranger who specifically warned that the route was too dangerous for families, a warning that Robert apparently ignored. Detective Winters stared at the retired ranger's name Marcus Headley had finally disclosed, Thomas Blackwood, dismissed from Park Service 5 years ago under suspicious circumstances. This connection explained why Robert might have ventured into an unmarked, potentially dangerous area. Winters immediately initiated background checks on Blackwood, determined to understand why a former ranger would send a family with children down a hazardous trail. 1 year after the disappearance, the community of Larimer County had developed a painful familiarity with absence. Faded posters of the Mason family clung stubbornly to community bulletin boards and storefront windows, their smiling faces bleached by sun and weathered by Colorado's harsh seasons. The once vibrant images now served as ghostly reminders of unresolved grief, most residents averting their eyes as they passed. At the local church where the Masons had attended services, a permanent memorial occupied the 3rd pew from the front. A framed family photograph, 4 hymnals, and a small brass plaque commemorated the family that many had now reluctantly accepted would never return. June 12, 2006, marked exactly 1 year since the Masons had loaded their blue Honda Civic and disappeared into the mountains. Catherine, now living permanently in her son's house, rose before dawn and methodically watered each plant, dusted each surface, and straightened each photograph, just as she had done every day for 12 months. That morning, she noticed a red light blinking on the answering machine, the sheriff's office calling to inform her that Winters had received permission to conduct a limited, targeted search of the area, suggested by Headley's new information when weather permitted. Catherine clutched the kitchen counter for support, unexpected hope surging through her diminished frame after months of crushing disappointment. In July, when summer finally opened the higher elevations to searchers, Winters assembled a small team to explore the western region indicated by Blackwood's directions. For 4 days, they combed the steep terrain, but the search area proved vastly larger than their limited resources could effectively cover. "I understand the budget constraints, sir," Sheriff Donovan argued into his phone, pacing his office while addressing the mayor, "but 4 days isn't sufficient to properly survey an area this complex. His request for extension was denied, the search team recalled, before they could reach the most remote sectors of the Hunters Access Road. By autumn, Catherine's financial situation had grown precarious. Sitting at her son's kitchen table, surrounded by unpaid bills, she calculated how much longer her dwindling retirement savings could maintain 2 properties. The next morning, she met with the local bank manager, who gently explained that no further extensions on Robert's mortgage could be granted without evidence that he might return. "I'm sorry, Mrs. Mason," the banker said, avoiding her eyes, "but the bank has been extraordinarily accommodating given the circumstances. We simply cannot extend indefinitely." Detective Winters continued his investigation, despite increasing pressure to focus on more recent cases. In March 2007, he discovered an email from Jennifer to her friend, Jennifer Whiting, expressing concerns about Noah's recurring nightmares. "Noah is having those nightmares again." Jennifer had written 6 weeks before their disappearance, screaming during the night about the man who watches. "Robert thinks it's just a phase, but I'm considering taking him to a specialist." This disturbing revelation prompted Winters to interview Noah's school psychologist about the drawings discovered earlier. "These images show consistent patterns of perceived threat," the psychologist explained, examining the crayon sketches. "The dark figure appears in multiple drawings, always positioned behind or above the family figures." Every Sunday morning, Catherine maintained her ritual of meticulously tending the plants on the front porch of the Mason home, nodding mechanically to neighbors whose concerned glances followed her diminishing figure. Their expressions had evolved from active sympathy to distant pity, and finally, to the uncomfortable avoidance reserved for walking reminders of tragedy. At Emily's school, administrators had created a modest memorial display in the main hallway, featuring her award-winning photographs, certificates of achievement, and her donated violin. Younger students now passed by without recognizing her name. Emily Mason had become a school legend rather than a remembered classmate. On the first anniversary of the disappearance, CUSA TV from Denver produced a special report revisiting the case. The reporter interviewed Catherine in the Masons' living room, cameras focusing on the untouched family photographs that lined the shelves. "I still believe they're out there," Catherine insisted, her once robust voice now thin and wavering. "Someone knows something. Someone must have seen something." The broadcast generated a brief surge of public interest, resulting in 6 calls to the dedicated tip line. Winters investigated each lead meticulously, though all eventually proved unfounded. One caller reported seeing a family resembling the Masons at a Wyoming gas station. Security footage revealed only a superficial resemblance. Another claimed to have spotted Jennifer at a Denver grocery store 2 months after the disappearance. The woman turned out to be a tourist from Nevada. Despite mounting pressure to classify the case as cold, Winters continued searching for connections, often working evenings and weekends from his home dining table. His wife observed with growing concern as case files spread across their living space. Her husband's obsession with the Mason family deepening as official interest waned. On the night of the first anniversary, Catherine finally succumbed to exhaustion, falling asleep on the living room sofa while watching old home videos of Robert's childhood. At 2:17 in the morning, the shrill ring of the telephone jolted her awake. With trembling hands, she answered, her heart pounding. The line carried only breathing for several long seconds. Then a child's voice whispered, "Rex is scared," before the connection abruptly terminated, leaving Catherine frantically trying to call back the unknown number, screaming, "Noah? Noah, is that you?" into the dead line. Detective Winters arrived at the Mason house at 2:45 in the morning, still wearing pajama pants beneath his hastily donned jacket. Catherine stood in the doorway, her face ashen under the porch light, hands trembling as she recounted the disturbing call. "I know that voice. It was Noah. I'm certain of it," she insisted, leading Winters to the kitchen where the phone sat. "We need to trace that call immediately," Winters said, pulling out his cell phone and calling the department's technical specialist. Within 20 minutes, a telecommunications officer arrived with tracing equipment, connecting it swiftly to the landline. "The system will capture any incoming calls now," the technician explained. "If they call again, we'll have them." Catherine didn't sleep that night, stationed beside the phone with a notepad, ready to record any details if another call came through. By morning, the technical team had managed to trace the mysterious call to a public payphone at a truck stop in Cheyenne, Wyoming, approximately 90 miles north of Larimer County. Winters immediately contacted Wyoming authorities, who dispatched officers to review security footage from the truck stop. By afternoon, grainy video showed a hooded figure using the payphone at precisely 2:17 in the morning, a teenage boy, face partially obscured, but clearly not 8-year-old Noah Mason. 2 days later, Wyoming police identified the caller as 16-year-old Brett Lawson, who confessed immediately when confronted at his Cheyenne home with evidence from the security cameras. "It was just supposed to be a prank," the teenager sobbed as Winters confronted him in his parents' living room. "I read about the case online. Some forum was talking about how the kid's dinosaur was called Rex. I didn't think anyone would believe it was really him." "You have no idea the suffering you've caused," Winters said, his professional demeanor barely masking his disgust. A grieving grandmother thought she heard her missing grandson's voice after a year of torment. When Winters delivered the crushing news to Catherine, she stood motionless in the kitchen, a plate slipping from her trembling hands and shattering on the tile floor. Her momentary hope, the first genuine spark in months, extinguished completely. The cruel prank seemed to age her overnight, deepening the lines around her eyes and mouth as though carving permanent channels for her grief. By March 2008, Catherine had developed a rigid pattern of preservation. Each morning, she meticulously vacuumed Emily's bedroom, careful not to disturb the teenager's possessions, the collection of photography books, the carefully arranged makeup on the vanity, the posters of famous violinists. The room remained a perfect time capsule from June 2005, dust never allowed to settle on abandoned dreams. In August, the case briefly resurfaced when a cashier at a supermarket in Cedar City, Utah, reported seeing a woman she believed was Jennifer Mason. Winters obtained the grainy security footage, studying the frames that showed a dark-haired woman in profile at the checkout counter. The resemblance was striking enough to warrant investigation. Catherine's hope rekindled as Winters drove her across state lines to Utah. Throughout the 7-hour journey, she clutched her purse containing recent photographs of the family, rehearsing what she would say when she finally saw her daughter-in-law. The disappointment, when they discovered the woman was actually a dental hygienist from Las Vegas, with only a superficial resemblance to Jennifer, was crushing. "I'm sorry to have put you through this," Winters said on the long drive back to Colorado, glancing worriedly at Catherine's vacant expression. "I thought this lead might be different." By January 2009, Catherine's physical health had begun to mirror her emotional state. At her annual checkup, Dr. Levine frowned at the blood pressure readings and significant weight loss. "You're not taking care of yourself, Mrs. Mason," he admonished gently, updating her chart. "I'm concerned about these numbers. Your blood pressure is dangerously high, and you've lost 17 pounds since your last visit." "I'll be fine once they're found," Catherine replied, the response now automatic after nearly 4 years of similar conversations. At the sheriff's department, the new commander, Howard Brennan, called Winters into his office for a performance review that quickly focused on the detective's ongoing preoccupation with the Mason case. "You've dedicated over 200 unauthorized hours to this case last year alone," Brennan said, tapping a folder containing Winters' timesheets. "I understand your attachment, but we need to focus on active cases where we can make a difference." Midweek afternoons found Catherine often sitting alone in the local church, kneeling in the third pew where the family had once attended services together. The pastor would find her there, sometimes sitting in silence for hours, her lips moving in soundless prayers. By April 2010, Winters had converted a wall of his home office into an elaborate case map, connecting the Mason disappearance to other seemingly unrelated missing persons cases throughout the Rocky Mountains. 5 different cases across 3 states over 15 years showed disturbing similarities. All involved people vanishing in remote areas without explanation, their vehicles either never recovered or found in locations that contradicted expected travel routes. "I think the Masons might not have been an isolated case," Winters declared, bursting into Sheriff Brennan's office with a folder of meticulously organized evidence. "Look at this pattern of similar disappearances." Brennan skeptically examined the files, his expression making clear his doubts about Winters' theory. As he flipped through the pages of circumstantial connections, a young deputy appeared in the doorway, his expression instantly altering the atmosphere in the room. "Sir, we just got a call from a group of climbers in the Western Ridge area," the deputy said breathlessly. "They found metallic blue fragments wedged between rocks in a remote ravine. They say it could be pieces of a Honda Civic, exactly in the area that was never properly searched during the initial investigation." Sheriff Brennan's eyes widened as he studied the photographs of the blue metal fragments. The forensic technician carefully placed the evidence bag under specialized lighting, examining the paint chips recovered from the ravine. "It's a match with the 2003 Civic blue metallic finish," the technician confirmed, comparing the sample against a manufacturer's color chart. "The degradation pattern is consistent with nearly 5 years of exposure to mountain conditions." Detective Winters felt a surge of vindication as he spread updated maps across the conference table at department headquarters. His finger traced the contours of Hidden Valley, a remote section west of the main search areas. "The fragment was found here," he explained to the newly assembled search team, "in a region we never properly explored during the initial investigation. The terrain is treacherous, steep ravines, unstable rock, formations, minimal trails. If the Mason vehicle somehow ended up in this area, it's no wonder we never located it." Tim Bergman, a robust 58-year-old former park ranger with weathered skin and experienced eyes, stood at the edge of the ravine, surveying the challenging terrain through binoculars. Having led multiple search and rescue operations during his 27-year career with the Park Service, his assessment carried significant weight. "This is going to be difficult," Bergman stated plainly, lowering the binoculars. "We need experienced climbers and specialized equipment. One wrong step in this terrain could turn rescuers into victims." Over the next week, Bergman assembled a team of 12 volunteers with advanced climbing and search and rescue experience. 2 ex-military specialists with mountain training joined the group, bringing valuable expertise in difficult terrain recovery operations. Each afternoon, the team practiced rappelling techniques on a nearby rock face, Bergman scrutinizing every movement and safety check. "Again," he called to a volunteer who had descended too quickly. "If you rush in these conditions, you die. The mountain's been waiting 5 years. It can wait another 5 minutes while you secure your line properly." In her small living room, Catherine Mason watched the local news report about the renewed search effort, her hands clasped tightly together in silent prayer. The television flickered blue light across her face, illuminating the large portrait of the Mason family that maintained its central position above the set, frozen smiles from a happier time watching over her vigil. "We have new evidence suggesting the Mason family vehicle may be located in a previously unsearched area," Sheriff Brennan announced on camera, carefully managing expectations. "While this represents a potentially significant development, I want to caution against premature conclusions." Early August brought clear skies as the search team began their methodical descent into the ravine. Each member wore safety harnesses connected to anchored ropes, carrying specialized equipment in waterproof backpacks. Radio operators maintained constant communication with the base camp established half a mile away, where medical personnel stood ready. "Team Alpha in position," Bergman reported over the radio as the first group reached a stable ledge approximately 60 feet down the ravine wall. "Beginning horizontal search pattern now." By mid-afternoon, another metal fragment was discovered lodged between rocks. The volunteer photographer, carefully documented its position before Peterson, their evidence technician, collected it in a sealed evidence bag. "Sierra team to base," crackled the radio. "We've recovered additional vehicle fragments, approximately 20 yards southeast of initial discovery point." Excitement rippled through the search teams as more evidence emerged, each piece carefully catalogued and photographed in situ. The scattered debris suggested a vehicle had indeed plunged into this remote section of the mountains, though the main wreckage remained undiscovered. On the third day of searching, dark clouds began gathering over the western peaks. Bergman consulted the weather radar on his smartphone, his expression growing concerned as he watched the rapidly approaching storm system. "Operation Central, this is lead team," he called into his radio. "We need to evacuate immediately. Snowstorm arriving faster than predicted. Current position becoming unsafe." The search teams struggled to ascend safely as the snowfall intensified dramatically, reducing visibility to mere feet. What had begun as a promising search operation ended in a hasty retreat, with teams barely making it back to base camp before conditions became life-threatening. Sheriff Brennan faced reporters the following morning, snow still, falling heavily outside the windows of the department's briefing room. "While we've recovered additional evidence that may be linked to the Mason vehicle, weather conditions have forced us to suspend operations until spring. We remain committed to resolving this case, but must prioritize the safety of our search personnel." By October 2010, the case had once again receded from public attention, leaving Catherine increasingly isolated in her relentless pursuit of answers. Sheriff Brennan, facing budget constraints and pressure to address rising drug trafficking concerns in the county, became increasingly resistant to allocating resources to the 5-year-old case. "We understand the emotional importance of this case," Brennan stated at a press conference, "but we have to prioritize situations where there's concrete evidence of crime or where lives can currently be saved." In 2013, filmmaker Matthew Johnston, a 35-year-old independent documentarian from Boulder, approached Catherine about producing a comprehensive examination of the case. Over several months, Johnston conducted extensive interviews with Catherine in her living room, his cameras capturing the preserved state of the Mason home and the physical toll that 8 years of waiting had taken on the grandmother. "They were a normal family," Catherine told the camera, her voice steady despite her frail appearance. "Robert was a good father. Jennifer was devoted to her patients. Emily had such talent with her violin and photography. And little Noah, he was just beginning to discover the world." The premiere of Echoes in the Mountains: The Mason Mystery at the Denver Film Festival played to a packed audience, who watched in respectful silence as Johnston's documentary methodically exposed the failures in the initial investigation and the promising leads that remained unexplored. National magazines and newspapers published reviews and articles about the documentary after Netflix acquired distribution rights, bringing unprecedented attention to the case. Headlines like "The Forgotten Family" and "Systematic Failures in Mountain Search" reignited public interest in the Mason disappearance. Catherine, now visibly more fragile at 74, made an emotional appeal during a television interview following the documentary's streaming release. "I just want to bury my son and his family," she said, her voice breaking. "I need that closure before I die." After the documentary began streaming on Netflix in 2013, an anonymous email arrived in filmmaker Johnston's inbox containing precise GPS coordinates within Hidden Valley, and a disturbing message: "The Honda didn't fall, it was pushed." Matthew Johnston stared at his computer screen, the anonymous email casting an eerie blue glow across his face in his darkened Boulder office. The message was brief but explosive. "The Honda didn't fall, it was pushed." Attached were precise GPS coordinates within Hidden Valley, suggesting the sender had specific knowledge of the Mason case. "This could be nothing, just someone seeking attention after the documentary aired," Johnston said when he met Detective Winters at an isolated coffee shop the following morning. The former police officer, now working as a private investigator since his retirement, examined the email printout with professional skepticism. Or it could be someone who knows exactly what happened, Winters replied, tapping the coordinates. Either way, we need to trace this. Johnston had already consulted a tech specialist who arrived at a frustrating conclusion. This was sent through multiple proxy servers, the specialist explained, pointing to the routing information. Whoever sent it knows how to cover their digital tracks, possibly using public networks and anonymizing software. In his new private office, Winters had transformed an entire wall into a comprehensive Mason case timeline. Newspaper clippings, photographs, and case reports connected by red string created a visual map of the 5-year investigation. With the phone pressed against his shoulder, he flipped through weathered reports while arguing with his former colleague. These coordinates are just 2 miles from where the climbers found those metal fragments, Winters insisted. We need a proper search team back in that area. Catherine sat at her small kitchen table that evening, her hands trembling slightly as she signed a substantial check to fund the new expedition. The amount represented nearly a third of her remaining savings, but her determined expression never wavered as she noted her dwindling account balance. Use whatever you need, she told Bergman when handing him the check. Just find them. At the community center the following week, Bergman spread high-resolution satellite imagery across a table, pointing out the specific area indicated by the anonymous coordinates. His expanded team of volunteers, now including 2 geologists and a forensic anthropologist, studied the terrain features intently. We'll approach from the North Ridge, Bergman explained, tracing the route with a weathered finger. The satellite imagery shows what might be a reflective surface at this exact position, though it's partially obscured by tree cover. April 2014 brought mild weather as the search team assembled with significantly improved technology. Drone operators prepared lightweight aircraft equipped with thermal cameras, while climbers checked advanced safety equipment designed for high-angle rescue operations. The expedition represented the most sophisticated search effort in the 9-year investigation. We have 3 days of clear weather forecasted, Bergman briefed the team. Let's make them count. The initial descent into the ravine proceeded methodically, with Bergman and 2 experienced climbers establishing safety lines secured at multiple anchor points. Communication remained constant through waterproof radios as they navigated the treacherous terrain that had claimed the Mason family. Hold position, called one of the climbers, carefully brushing away soil and debris from a flat surface. I've got what appears to be a drag mark on this rock face. The team photographer documented each discovery, while another member collected soil samples from around the marks. Several yards away, another searcher identified what appeared to be impact damage on a tree trunk, approximately 15 feet above the current ground level. These patterns are consistent with a large object having been dragged or having slid across this area, noted Winters as he analyzed the photographs sent by the team. The spacing and depth suggest significant weight, possibly a vehicle. In a university laboratory, a volunteer geologist examined soil and rock samples collected from the site. These marks show characteristics typical of human activity rather than natural erosion, he concluded after studying the microscopic patterns. The displacement patterns in these samples don't match typical water or wind erosion. Catherine watched live-stream footage of the expedition on a tablet Johnston had provided, her wrinkled face illuminated by the screen in her darkened living room. Each new discovery sent her heart racing with hope and dread simultaneously, the prospect of answers bringing both relief and terror. By the 3rd day of searching, Catherine's health took a sudden turn. The stress of waiting, combined with years of neglecting her own well-being, culminated in a severe cardiac event. Hospital monitors displayed her irregular heartbeat as she clutched her nurse's hand desperately. "I need to know what happened to my son before I go," she whispered, her voice barely audible above the medical equipment's steady beeping. Winters visited her hospital room that evening, gently placing photographs of the recent discoveries beside her bed. "We're closer than ever, Catherine," he said softly, adjusting her blanket. "Don't give up now." The volunteer forensic team worked through the night, analyzing tiny fragments recovered from the search site. "We've confirmed additional parts matching the vehicle model," reported the lead technician. "And we've identified what appears to be a piece of synthetic fabric, possibly from seat upholstery or clothing." While Catherine fought for her life, the laboratory analysis of the most recently discovered metal fragments revealed an unexpected detail that changed the investigation's trajectory. The chief technician called Winters at 2 a.m, her voice tense with excitement. "We found traces of potassium xanthate on the metal samples," she explained. "It's an industrial chemical compound specifically used in mining operations, separating minerals from ore. There's absolutely no natural explanation for its presence at that location." The discovery of potassium xanthate on the metal fragments instantly transformed the investigation. This industrial chemical, used specifically in mining operations, had no logical reason to be present in a national park wilderness area. Detective Winters immediately recognized the implications as he spoke with the university geochemist the following morning. "This compound is potassium xanthate, exclusively used in mineral separation processes," explained Dr. Eleanor Richards, pointing to the spectrographic analysis on her computer screen. "It's highly regulated because of its environmental impact. There's absolutely no natural explanation for its presence in this location." Winters and Johnston spent the next day at the municipal library, methodically reviewing archived local newspapers from 2004 and 2005, searching for any connection between mining activities and the area where the Mason vehicle fragments were discovered. The table between them grew crowded with stacks of microfilm printouts as they hunted for leads. "Found something," Johnston said suddenly, pushing a small article dated February 15, 2005 across the table. The headline read, "Westridge Minerals Denied Exploration Permit for Third Time Due to Environmental Concerns." "Westridge Minerals," Winters repeated, jotting the name in his notebook. "Let's see who owned this company." That evening, Winters accessed corporate records online, scrolling through the business registration documents for Westridge Minerals. As he reached the ownership section, he froze, then zoomed in on the name that appeared fifth on the list of principals, Marcus Headley. Headley wasn't just Robert's colleague who mentioned the trail, Winters said when he called Johnston. He was part owner of a mining company that wanted access to that exact area. The following morning, Johnston confronted Sheriff Brennan in his office, placing the corporate records on his desk with Headley's name highlighted. "How did no one connect Headley to a mining company during the original investigation?" Johnston demanded, struggling to keep his voice level. "The same man who directed the Mason family to that remote area was financially invested in mining operations there." Sheriff Brennan's defensive posture revealed his discomfort. Headley was just one of 200 work colleagues interviewed. He mentioned the trail, yes, but there was never any reason to investigate his personal business affairs. Nothing connected him to the disappearance beyond suggesting a hiking route. In her hospital room, Catherine listened intently as Winters carefully explained the connection between Marcus Headley, Westridge Minerals, and the remote area where her family had vanished. The cardiac monitor beside her bed registered an increased heart rate as she processed this new information. "Marcus came to our backyard barbecues," Catherine said, her voice weak but determined. "He and Robert worked on projects together for years. Robert trusted him." Her fingers tightened around the bed rail. "If he deliberately sent my son to that area knowing the dangers." Later that week, Johnston received an unexpected email from Rebecca Lawson, who identified herself as a former accounting clerk for Westridge Minerals. "I saw your documentary," she wrote. "There are things about Westridge and that area of the park that the public should know." They arranged to meet at a quiet cafe far from Larimer County. Rebecca, a nervous woman in her late 40s, continuously scanned the room as she showed Johnston and Winters photographs stored on her phone. These show unauthorized prospecting operations inside the park boundaries in 2005, she explained, her voice barely above a whisper. The images displayed small mining equipment camouflaged with foliage, positioned in an area that matched the topography where the Mason vehicle fragments had been discovered. They found a rare earth minerals vein that would have been worth millions, Rebecca continued, glancing nervously over her shoulder. When the park denied access permits, Headley and the other owners decided to extract samples secretly to attract investors. They had illegal operations running from January through August that year. Winters studied a topographical map he'd brought along, comparing the locations in Rebecca's photographs with the route that Headley had suggested to Robert. This trail would have taken the Mason family directly through the area where they were conducting illegal mining operations. Johnston leaned forward, his filmmaker's mind constructing the narrative. What if the Masons arrived there when someone from Westridge was working? They would have witnessed an illegal operation inside national park boundaries, a federal crime with significant penalties. Back at his home office that evening, Winters accessed his former department's database, using credentials that technically should have been revoked upon his retirement. He needed to verify the whereabouts of each Westridge principal during the days surrounding the Mason disappearance. Phone records, credit card transactions, anything that places them near that area when the family disappeared, he muttered to himself as he navigated through the system. Working through the night, Winters finally uncovered the connection he'd been seeking in Marcus Headley's archived phone records. On June 12, 2005, the exact day the Mason family vanished, Headley made 6 separate calls to a number belonging to Thomas Blackwood, a former park ranger who had been dismissed for allegedly assisting illegal hunters access restricted areas of the park. Winters' hands trembled slightly as he cross-referenced his notes with the original investigation files. According to Headley's initial statement, Robert Mason had learned about the locals-only trail from a retired ranger, the very same Thomas Blackwood who had received multiple calls from Headley the day the family disappeared. The connection between Headley and the former ranger Blackwood stunned Winters. 6 phone calls on the exact day of the Masons' disappearance couldn't be coincidental. This was the break he'd been searching for through nearly a decade of investigation. "We need to find Blackwood immediately," Winters told Johnston over a secure phone line. These calls suggest coordination between Headley and Blackwood on the very day Robert and his family vanished. Using his remaining law enforcement contacts, Winters traced Thomas Blackwood to a remote cabin in northern Idaho, approximately 70 miles from the nearest town. Satellite imagery showed a rustic structure nestled among dense pine forest, accessible only by a winding dirt road that became impassable during winter months. "He's deliberately living off-grid," Winters observed, as he and Johnston plotted their approach on a paper map spread across the hood of their rental car. The GPS signal had disappeared 5 miles back, forcing them to navigate using traditional methods. "Perfect place to hide if you're running from something," Johnston replied, discreetly adjusting the miniature camera hidden in his jacket button. Though not strictly legal, they agreed documentation of any conversation with Blackwood might be their only opportunity to gather admissible evidence. The cabin appeared through the trees as they rounded a final bend in the rutted dirt road, a weathered structure with smoke rising from a stone chimney. Winters parked their vehicle at a respectful distance, approaching on foot to avoid appearing threatening. Thomas Blackwood emerged onto his porch before they reached the steps, a weathered, bearded man of 64, holding his doorframe with wary defiance. His eyes narrowed as the visitors approached. "Whatever you're selling, I'm not buying," he called out, his posture indicating he might retreat inside at any moment. Winters identified himself, showing his private investigator credentials. "We'd like to talk about the Mason family," he said calmly, "and your connection to Marcus Headley and Westridge Minerals." Blackwood's expression hardened. "I don't have anything to say about that family. It was a long time ago." Despite his initial resistance, Blackwood reluctantly allowed them inside when Winters mentioned the potassium xanthate found on the vehicle fragments. The cabin's interior was spartanly furnished, but meticulously organized, the dwelling of a man who valued order and self-sufficiency. Winters methodically placed evidence on the rough-hewn table: photographs connecting Blackwood to Headley, corporate documents from Westridge Minerals, maps showing the location of illegal mining operations, and chemical analysis reports from the metal fragments. Johnston opened his tablet, displaying photographs of the Mason family. Noah would be 23 now, Emily would be 30. He swiped to show their smiling faces. They deserved to live their lives. Blackwood's hardened expression slowly transformed as he examined the evidence before him. For hours, he deflected questions, offering minimal responses as Winters and Johnston persistently but calmly pressed for information. The sun had begun to set, casting long shadows through the cabin windows, when Blackwood's resistance finally crumbled. "It was never supposed to be like this," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "Nobody was supposed to get hurt." As darkness fell completely outside, Blackwood finally revealed the truth, his confession captured by Johnston's hidden camera. "Westridge was illegally extracting samples. I just provided maps of routes without surveillance." He described how events unfolded that fateful Sunday. 2 workers were collecting mineral samples when the family appeared. They panicked and contacted Headley. Blackwood's weathered face showed genuine remorse as he continued. "Headley told them to scare the family off, make them leave and never come back. They pursued the Masons' car along those dirt roads." The former ranger stared at his hands as he delivered the most damning revelation. The road was treacherous. The father lost control trying to escape. When Headley found out what happened, he ordered them to hide any evidence of the company's presence. Winters struggled to maintain his professional composure. "You're saying they left an entire family to die in that ravine and deliberately obstructed the search efforts?" "I provided incorrect coordinates when the search began," Blackwood admitted, eyes downcast. "Headley paid me to keep quiet. He said no one could have survived the fall anyway." Back in Colorado, Catherine received the news of Blackwood's confession from her hospital bed. Her frail body trembled with conflicting emotions: vindication that her persistence had finally revealed the truth, devastation at the betrayal that had cost her family their lives. "All these years," she whispered, gripping Winter's hand. "All these years, I knew something wasn't right about their disappearance." Winters formally presented the new evidence to the district attorney's office the following day, including the secretly recorded confession. The case would be officially reopened, with federal authorities joining the investigation due to the crimes occurring on national park land. While legal proceedings began to take shape against Blackwood and the surviving Westridge principals, Johnston returned to his Boulder office to update his documentary with the new revelations. As he checked his email that evening, he found a message from an anonymous sender with no text in the body, only an attachment. The image showed a yellowed page from what appeared to be a child's diary, the awkward handwriting immediately recognizable as belonging to a young boy. The entry was dated June 14, 2005, one day after the supposed accident, beginning with the words, "I'm hiding and very scared. The bad men can't find us here." Johnston stared at the diary page on his screen, his hands trembling as he enlarged the image. Noah Mason's childish handwriting was unmistakable, the crayon marks pressing heavily into the paper. "I'm hiding and very scared. The bad men can't find us here." The timestamp on the email showed it had been sent through another anonymous proxy server, impossible to trace. "This can't be real," Johnston whispered, immediately calling Winters despite the late hour. "If Noah survived at least a day after the accident, everything we thought we knew is wrong." Within hours, Winters had assembled a forensic image analyst to examine the digital file. "The paper aging appears authentic," the specialist confirmed after careful examination. "The handwriting patterns match samples from Noah's school records. Either this is genuine, or someone has gone to extraordinary lengths to create a convincing forgery." Sheriff Brennan, now fully invested in resolving the case that had haunted his department for 15 years, authorized an emergency search operation. Tim Bergman assembled his most experienced team members, determined to examine the exact coordinates where the Honda had been discovered. "We need to search beyond the vehicle location," Bergman instructed as the team prepared their equipment at dawn. If the boy survived the initial crash, he would have sought shelter nearby. Advanced drones equipped with thermal and ground-penetrating radar technology swept the area surrounding the crash site, mapping terrain features that might have been overlooked in previous searches. By mid-afternoon, one of the operators noticed an anomaly approximately 200 meters downslope from the vehicle's location. "There's something here," called out Alexis Cooper, an experienced volunteer climber, as she carefully approached a rock formation partially obscured by 15 years of vegetation growth. "It looks like it could be a small cave entrance." The team methodically cleared away the accumulated plants and debris, revealing a narrow opening in the mountainside. The natural shelter would have been nearly impossible to spot without precise scanning equipment, especially during the hasty searches conducted years earlier. Inside the shallow cave, illuminated by powerful flashlights, the search team discovered what they had sought for a decade and a half. A forensic technician photographed each item. Before collection, the badly deteriorated remains of a red backpack matching Noah's, scraps of clothing consistent with what the boy had been wearing, and most heartbreakingly, a severely degraded plush dinosaur recognizable as Rex. "Document everything exactly as found," Winters instructed, his voice tight with emotion. "This may be our only opportunity to understand what happened after the crash." In a climate-controlled laboratory, technicians worked meticulously to preserve and digitize the fragile pages of a makeshift journal found protected inside a zippered compartment of Noah's backpack. The dry conditions inside the cave had preserved the boy's final testament remarkably well. Catherine Mason, too frail to visit the recovery site, listened from her hospital bed as Winters gently read the transcribed entries from Noah's diary. Her silent tears flowed as Noah's words revealed the terrible truth through a child's innocent perspective. "The bad men made Daddy's car go off the road," Winters read, his professional composure barely maintained. "Daddy and Mommy and Emmy won't move. I'm hurt and scared." Subsequent entries documented Noah's survival for approximately 4 days after the crash. The boy had been thrown from the vehicle during its final roll, landing in thick underbrush that broke his fall. Injured but mobile, he had found the small cave and attempted to survive as his father had taught him during camping trips. His final entry, nearly illegible, indicated he had tried to find help but was too weak from injuries and exposure. Catherine gripped the photograph of Noah tightly as Johnston continued reading the diary entries. "He was so brave," she whispered. "Just a little boy, but so brave." The district attorney assembled a formidable case against the surviving conspirators. Thomas Blackwood, wearing prison orange and shackles, refused to meet the eyes of the Mason family photographs displayed in the courtroom as charges were read. Negligent homicide, obstruction of justice, conspiracy, and multiple environmental violations. Headley, deceased 3 years earlier, was posthumously named as a co-conspirator. On a crisp autumn morning at Larimer County Cemetery, a solemn crowd gathered as the identified remains of the Mason family were finally laid to rest together. The community that had gradually forgotten them now united in remembrance, standing silently as Catherine placed 4 roses and the restored plush dinosaur on the shared granite headstone. "You can rest now," she whispered to the grave. "The truth has finally come to light." In December 2019, during a particularly severe snowstorm, Catherine suffered a fatal heart attack while placing flowers beneath the framed photograph of the Mason family at the community center. At 79, she departed with the peace of knowing her family's fate had been discovered and those responsible held accountable. 5 years after the resolution of the Mason case, a rookie park ranger making his routine patrol through Hidden Valley, now officially renamed Mason Memorial Trail, paused when his flashlight reflected off something unusual glinting between rocks. Kneeling to investigate, he discovered a small metallic flash drive, partially exposed by recent erosion, containing files dated 2005 that suggested the conspiracy behind the Mason family's disappearance might have roots far deeper and more powerful than anyone had ever imagined.